Yeah, films. Yeah, films. We watched some films. Now let's talk about those
All right, let's
films.
hop in so I can let me on my soapbox. Let me up here.
Yeah.
View's great. So we're going to be talking about Rosemary's Baby from 1968. Yeah, not the cool new one. And this is about a young couple trying for a baby moves into an aging, ornate apartment building on Central Park West, where they find themselves surrounded by peculiar neighbors, and is directed by Roman Polanski, to which we say, ew.
Yeah.
Um, just as we go. But just to give you a bit more synopsis of that. Also, it says like they're trying for a baby, but Rosemary is always considering having babies, but Guy is like, no, not until I'm like a famous person. So I don't know, they weren't really trying until later. He wouldn't
Yeah.
let her.
Don't men
Anyway,
think that all women are trying for babies at all times?
yeah, because that's all they
That's
are
all we are.
worth. Um
Continue.
anyway, Rosemary's Baby. Rosemary's Baby follows Rosemary Woodhouse, which she says like a million times. She always is like, "This is Rosemary Woodhouse." It's like I don't think I've ever said my whole name all the time as much
Mhm.
as she does. But she's a young woman who moves into a new apartment with her actor husband, Guy Woodhouse, just a guy. And in this apartment complex, Rosemary meets her neighbors that are nosy, rude, and loud, older couple, the Castavets, and a ward of theirs, Terry, who befriends Rosemary before her untimely fall out a window. And that is a supposed suicide that Rosemary doesn't quite buy. And there's a
Mm.
lot where it's like Rosemary's gut is like, that ain't right, but she's conditioned herself to not listen to that.
Mhm.
Just like that's everything in this film. The Cassavetes bully their way into Rosemary's life. Her actor husband Guy has been down on his luck until a freak accident allows him to land a leading part, and this inspires Guy to want to finally start a family with Rosemary. And this is something that she has mentioned numerous times. She says like 3 or 4 would be nice to Mrs. Castavet, and they determine the day when Rosemary will be the most fertile and mark their calendars. However, when the night arrives, Rosemary becomes intoxicated, alarmingly so, and passes out. And her night is filled with a horrific nightmare sequence where she is then raped by a demon. Perhaps the devil himself. Guy explains cheerfully in the morning when Rosemary awakens to find terrible scratches on her violated body that he had gone ahead and had sex with her despite her being unconscious. Then he just jokes about it. He says it made him feel like a necrophiliac.
Mm.
Huh. Yeah.
Yep.
And at first she is like upset, like you when I was unconscious, like I wasn't here, like what are you?
Yeah.
And then
That is rape.
but
Don't
there
do that.
was not that word for this situation for her.
Yep.
It did not qualify at this time period, and
Mhm.
she eventually like brushes it off. It's kind of like, how could she get mad that her husband still wants her even when she's not even there? Um, Ew. So then, because of this night, Rosemary becomes pregnant and is immediately ill. And it's not the morning sickness that you'd imagine with pregnancy. Rosemary is completely devoid of that pregnant glow and instead looks near to death. Like
Yeah.
she is sickly. She's in constant pain. And although she is suspicious of her husband and his new friends, she doesn't advocate for her own health. One of the few moments of feminine solidarity is when Rosemary's friends who are otherwise absent.
Yeah.
And I will say that isolation from your friends is a form of abuse. We
Yeah.
just covered that. So flag. But they urge her to see a different physician. They tell her that it is not normal and that she looks incredibly unwell because she does. She looks like she's dying. Other than like her hip new haircut that Guy was so rude about. They're worried for her safety. And it's also clear from Guy's behavior at this party that something isn't right because he's always lurking and he's like desperate to have his eyes on ears on Rosemary at all times. Um, lest she reveals her struggles to someone who's not involved in the scheme.
Yeah.
like all these outsiders that she's allowed into the house. And so when they're asking her to go see a new physician, she responds in a panic that she will not get an abortion, to which her friends politely remind her had not even been mentioned. No one said anything about that, hun. We just said that you look sick.
Yeah.
And when Rosemary is finally at the end of a rope and desperate enough to finally stand up for herself, the pain miraculously vanishes, and Dr. Saperstein was right. There is no need to worry. And then we
Mhm.
time jump to a round and bright Rosemary, happily preparing for the arrival of her baby. And as the birth becomes more imminent, things begin to further unravel, and she attempts to escape, but the conspiracy runs deeper than she could have imagined. Uh, though she's like, you question yourself too, because it's like, how could it be this deep?
Yeah.
But it apparently is. And it results in her having the baby. And she is then told the baby has died during childbirth. And while being the only person mourning her child, she hears the cries of a baby next door. She investigates that apartment and stumbles upon the cult. Uh, there's a black crib told in her monstrous son, Adrian. It's her and Satan's son that will bring about the end of the world, but she is a mother at the end of the day, and her instincts kick in, resulting in her taking on her role happily, and thus ushering in the end of the world. So that's Rosemary's Baby. I saved you 2 hours of just like a lot of lurking and a lot of being
Yeah.
uncomfortable. I would say a lot of the cinematography and just like the small apartment and the gaslighting and all of that really does remind me of the yellow wallpaper, where it's just like
Mhm.
you are trapped, right? And you're told to believe something else, so you feel like you're going insane.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening to her. So, one of the big things that I want to hop in before I even talk about specifically some of the issues I have with dubbing this film feminism or feminist is this idea of separating the art from the artist.
Mhm.
Because yeah, you can't do that. So, Octavia Butler once said, or wrote in a book, all that you touch, you change, and all that you change changes you. So, what we do matters and it
Yeah.
has an impact, and it has an impact on whatever it is that we're doing, and also an impact on ourselves for doing it.
Mhm.
And we have discussed previously on the Ghouls in some form or another this idea about separating an artist from their art. Like it is something that we've brought up because when we cover things that have been around for a long time, we have to confront like the time period in which they were created. We have to we also, a big part of media literacy is thinking about who's creating it, because that
Yeah.
ultimately has an effect on how this story is told. And it's also been a popular topic just out there in the world with this idea of like cancel culture, which uh, doesn't really work because no one's really actually canceled. Look it up. They're all still doing and thriving and living their lives. There's
Yeah.
apparently no repercussions for your actions. But there's this question of, can we still love and appreciate a piece of media or art that has impacted our lives individually when the creator is a POS? So, what I think of when I think of this is specifically all the people who made Harry Potter their entire identity. Um, and it's like, what is left for them in the ashes of their beloved franchise? Uh,
Yeah.
and it's still very profitable, and that turf is beyond wealthy. So when we say eat the rich, we mean her too.
Yeah.
So again, there are no repercussions. And while we can't help or change the impact media had on us as growing people, we can't erase the thread between the artist and the art either. Because
Mhm.
when we create, we take pieces of ourselves and input that into the work. Our lived
Mhm.
experiences, our identity, our worldviews influence our art. And as someone who works creative, like closely with creatives every day, one of the biggest lessons that I always teach with all of the burgeoning creators is that who you are as a creator is just as important to the piece of media as the plot and the characters and everything else.
Yeah.
Because you are going to impact it. Your knowledge, your
Yeah.
opinions, like you can't make something that's not you. It's just not like
Yeah.
you're going to, no
So
matter
if
what you try to
you're
do.
a problematic person that gets translated into the art.
It does. Or your work can suffer from not
Mhm.
having all of the information, right? All
Mhm.
of the experience to these characters that you're trying to convey. Like we were saying with like the Rosemary Baby TV show, like hoping that in making Zoe Saldana this character that we're not ignoring what that actually means, which means having to talk to people who would have that experience because Agnieszka does not have that experience. She is not a Black woman. She's Polish. And so it is, kind of a question of that, of like looking and into what influenced it and what support they have. Like we've talked about that quite a lot.
Yeah.
And I say all of this to highlight an issue that we have found in this series specifically of F the Patriarchy, because only two of the films we're covering are made by women or femme folk. And we chose these films for a variety of reasons. One is the subject matter, but also to discuss the influences of film and how it is so much of you and also can so easily transcend your original intentions, if you had any intentions at all, Alex Garland. Um, so I want to be very clear that the director of today's film is a disgusting, terrible human being, and we do not endorse him in any way. And we cannot separate the art from the artist in this film. And even though this film is an adaptation of the novel of the same name by Ira Levins, both of these men have affected the work in a very specific way because they just do not have the right lens to tell this story.
Yeah.
Which is why Lyle did such a great job with the materials, because it was taken in a different way. It was approached in a different way, and allowed for us to kind of combat some of the things that are missing in
Mhm.
Rosemary's Baby. So, one of the biggest things of Rosemary's Baby that I found was that there is just no feminism in this patriarchal world.
Yeah.
There is no hope, essentially. So, this story is a patriarchal hellscape. Period. The
Yeah.
ending leaves us to believe the end is upon us, and that we have to watch as Rosemary continues to put others' lives before her very own, just as she's been conditioned to do in this world. And in an article on Tor.com that I found this answer that I was looking for. So I was like looking around, there's all like, like the feminist movie, blah blah blah, and I was like, that's not what I'm looking for. Even like looking up like abortion rights in Rosemary's Baby, and I was like, I don't think that's it either. So I
Yeah.
found this really great article. Which really highlighted what I felt this film, though it was dubbed feminist, is actually incredibly lacking in any feminism. So Ira Levin's Rosemary's Baby, Patriarchy Without Feminism is Hell by Noah Berlatsky. They explain that these men paint a world that is dark, grim, and utterly hopeless. And it's a defeatist approach that only exists because these men can't understand a world in which feminism exists, and therefore cannot see a way out of this hell. So in Rosemary's Baby, feminist consciousness is notably absent, which is part of why the novel is so bleak and terrifying. The narrative recognizes that Rosemary's fate is diabolically unjust, but it offers no way out, narratively or theoretically. The devil's victory is total, not because he defeats feminism, but because he rules over a world in which feminist possibilities don't exist. And in our Don't Look Up episode, Kat had a really great explanation about the defeatist attitude of that film specifically that ignored the indigenous climate change activists who are actively putting in the work to stop the end of the world. And by painting such a bleak picture of the world, it diminished the hard work of those working to save the world every day.
Yeah.
And that's what I was thinking when I was like reading that, was like, that's exactly what it is that they can't even imagine. So in the
Yeah.
book, Rosemary is so affected by this patriarchal world that she is written even more hopeless than in the film. Noah Berlatsky goes on to say that in the book, Rosemary's colonization by patriarchy goes even beyond verbal acquiescence. Was that not it?
No.
Oh
What
no.
did I do?
Is it this one? Yeah.
Oh, they're just out of order. I got you. Sorry.
Okay. Um, okay. Rosemary's colonization by patriarchy goes even beyond verbal acquiescence. Levin frames her self betrayal as biological. Only partly conscious, she enjoys the devil's rape of her, describing the demon inside of her as as painfully, wonderfully big before she orgasms. Um, so absurd that, like, you like tell me it's written by a man. Tell me it was written by a man. If you, oh my god, Ira Levins and Roman Polanski succeeded in creating a horrifying, hopeless world because Rosemary is broken and a clear representation of the effects of the patriarchy. But it, like some of the other films we've covered, such as Men, it sits unwell with us when the tale is told by a man because it feels exploitative. It's putting women's pain on display like it's news, ignorant to the impact it has on femme audiences, and then profiting off of the story.
Mm.
And Roman Polanski is no stranger to abusing femme bodies for his own pleasures, so it's no surprise.
Yeah.
But it just clearly shows that they have a lack of information and knowledge that they could paint such a bleak landscape that has no hope at all, which is like not what we get with Lyle. Lyle, we had some hope. Because there is actually there's it's bad, but we're not reduced to this. I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
that,
There's
that I
always
have a problem
something
with.
you can do.
And they just reduce us to these like flimsy things. Anyway, there's just no help for the unwicked in Rosemary's Baby. So, going back to the film, Guy, the neighbors, and others around Rosemary, such as the doctor, are clearly the villains of the story. But Rosemary is also a villain to herself. Rosemary prioritizes everyone else's life over her own, and she tries so desperately to please others, and throughout the film, constantly hides or dismisses her own feelings so as to not impose on others. Even though she's uncomfortable with the Castavets, immediately disliking them, she still goes along with being cordial because it is expected. Those are her neighbors. She has to be the good wife. Um, she's performing her duties as a woman. And whenever she hints at her own opinion, Guy questions her and she quickly pushes it away. Like, no, 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 it's okay. Everything's okay. I don't want to like explain that I don't feel good. Like I don't want people to
Yeah.
care about my well-being, like God forbid.
Yeah.
She's like constantly like backtracking. Like there's so many conversations where he's like, "Well, if you want to do that." She's like, "No, no, 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 no. That's okay."
Yeah. And it's also like to the fact that women are socialized to communicate indirectly or non-confrontationally because of the ever-present threat of violence.
Mhm.
And 1968, you knew it was worse.
Yeah.
But that's still like a thing. And yeah, I'm 100% just thought that was a helpful point.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it's like because there and that's like she is this result of like what happens if patriarchy goes unchecked, right?
Hmm.
It's just like when um like we think about the patriarchy also like harms men too. Like we don't ever think about
Hmm.
that, but it's like it harms you in ways that you're not always expecting, right? And it's
Yeah.
literally that she does not see herself as worth anything,
Hmm.
including the time of like her husband, to value her opinions and feelings. And if she
Yeah.
speaks out of turn, then she's being bad.
Hmm.
It makes her even more unworthy. Uh,
Hmm.
and she also like Rosemary herself was she like grew up in the church and it seemed I don't know for sure but it seemed like she might have been like adopted or something or just came from this like kind of constrictive environment where she might feel even more pressure to be good in case she's just given up on
Yeah,
or
like
given
patriarchal
away.
religious trauma.
Hmm. And I would say her only true selfish act was her haircut, which is like this rebellious shortcut that Guy insults her for immediately. He says, like, you didn't pay for that, did you? And the internet loves it. The internet loves her short haircut. And like every article was like, and then there's her hair. And I was like, it was so weird to me when it happened because she just comes in. She's been sick forever. She just comes in. She's got her hair done. And he's like, you didn't pay for that. And she's like, I got it at the place. And I'm like, why is this happening right now?
Yeah.
Like, is this advertising? Are we getting like product placement right now for this haircut? It was so weird. I felt like
Yeah.
Truman Show.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it definitely plays into. I don't even know, like, if he knew that this was a thing, but like the whole gender roles and having to present femininity in the view that a man, your worth is decided by if a man values you sexually.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was like really interesting just how she had that haircut, and it did feel like surprising or like kind of out of place considering every other action that was taking place.
Yeah, and it's also like I was talking to a friend, and their friend is pregnant again, and which is lovely. But my friend was kind of concerned because she said like her friend had made this remark, kind of that her husband was more attracted to her, or like even just basically attracted to her when she was pregnant. Like he loved her more when she was pregnant, and so she kept getting pregnant, and that's
Mm,
not a reason to get pregnant. That's like your husband
yeah,
should love you all the time. So that's kind of like what it feels like. Is like one, she's supposed to have that pregnant glow. Period. She doesn't,
yeah,
and now she got this short haircut that like launched this whole in vogue kind of look of having that short hair for women, and that's like kind of deemed like the feminist thing is like you have the short hair, you're not what this traditional girl looks like. And she was super stylish the whole
yeah.
time, absolutely. But um, it was still weird. But besides that haircut, she is just an amenable woman who does as expected. She wears a necklace that smells terrible and does not go with her outfits. She socializes with the toxic neighbors. She makes excuses for her husband literally raping her. The idea of your husband being held accountable for such a thing was very fresh at that time. And so didn't even occur to her. Like she's such a result of just the world
Society.
around her. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Rosemary is no one to turn to. Guy does not love her, period. And her
Nope.
neighbors spy and tattle. Her doctor disregards her concerns, which again, if we were to change her character out to be a woman of color, that would be a whole conversation about
Yeah.
how the medical system treats women of color and their pain. But this is just now there's like a cult is the
Mhm.
reason, instead of like that it's ingrained into our medical
Yeah.
textbooks that black people don't feel pain in the same
Yeah.
way, like instead of it being like actually societal, it's like
Yeah.
fake.
Yeah.
So
You can defeat the devil, but not the patriarchy societally and the oppressive systems that uphold it.
we can't win in this
Yeah.
film. So in Bashimia magazine, I found this article titled Rosemary's Baby, Reproductive Rights and Everyday Female Horrors. The writer explains marital rape became much more of an issue in the 60s since work to criminalize it began thanks to second wave feminism. In 1962, the model penal code stated that a man who has sexual intercourse with a female, not his wife, is guilty of rape if, strongly implying that it doesn't count as rape if you're married, because it's not your wife. So you can do
Mhm.
it anytime you want if it's your wife. So she has no idea. I did see an article at somewhere that tried to name Rosemary Woodhouse as a feminist icon. I think that was very funny. Because what world? She's like so absolutely not. Because in the end, she allowed the end of the world to happen. Like at the end, like this is 2022 Gabe, and millennial Gabe in like putting her feelings and like expectations of like how I view the world. I was just expecting her to like kill this baby. I was like, oh good, you're in there now. You can stab them. You have the knife. Like I was like, you're not
Yeah.
gonna get out of here, but at least the end of the world doesn't happen. Like this baby doesn't matter. And like that's just so in my blissful state of being unawares, and I hadn't watched Rosemary's Baby before this. I was like, oh, she's gonna do it, and then she doesn't. Like she lets the world end, and it's like it's not her fault, of course, but like it is because it's like there's a lot that's happening and why she's doing that, and the whole message is a problem because the
Mhm.
cult ultimately brought about the end. Yes, it was society and the patriarchal ideologies that allowed Rosemary to get in as deep as she did. But again, this is a problem of like not having any alternatives and to be isolated and manipulated uh, to bring about the end of the world. Like she
Yeah.
definitely was like she was in too deep. But the film never offers the alternative. Rosemary is not a final girl by any means, and in the end, she will not survive. She has been reduced to a vessel for this creature, and I would argue has always just been a vessel for any creature. even if it was a regular kid. Right?
Yeah.
Which many states are so eager to reduce women to today, just vessels. When that baby no longer needs her milk or care, she'll be dispensed of. She doesn't matter. And Levins and Polanski cannot conceive of a world where women fight back and win. They find us already in too deep, and they ignore and dismiss the work of feminists and activists everywhere because patriarchy without feminism is truly hell.
Yeah.
And that's all I got to say.
Nice. And it's like, so a few things. One, I think they said her name so much because it's kind of like Handmaid's Tale and that they're of the person they're married to.
That's why she said Woodhouse every single
Mhm.
time. Like, what was her
Because
name before that?
yeah, she did not exist before her marriage name. That's my
Mhm.
theory.
That's a good one.
And also the reason why, as you were saying, is that like the writer and Polanski also did not view her as a person.
Mhm.
They viewed her as a vessel, which is specifically very evident in who Polanski was as a person. So of course, Rosemary is reduced to a nothingness. They're not a
Mhm.
person; they are a vessel, because that's literally how the director viewed women. Actually,
Yeah, I mean, she's just like a representation of the audience because this is supposed to be a film for women, right? Like men aren't going in there and being like, "Wow, this is my favorite film." Like that's like if anything they are cuz they're like, "Oh, the art director." Like they're totally missing the point. Like this
yeah,
is supposed to be a film for women. Like
yeah,
they're or just like allies in that way. And so you go into that, you are like you go into Rosemary, right? She is a shell that you're supposed to occupy while you're watching. And he has essentially told us this is what you are. You're a vessel for the end of the world, and you can't do anything about it.
yeah,
You're only what we need you to be.
yeah. And I mean, that's what society thinks of women now, as much as they did in the 1960s, just slightly more subtly. Um,
Sure.
and maybe not even subtly.
Yeah.
It's just like a fun time.